When did you realize that you're dating an idiot? She walked into a computer lab on campus and simply picked up a computer and walked home with it. She was living with me at the time, so I get home to find a very familiar-looking computer sitting on the kitchen table. She literally thought the computers were free for students. It took a bit of explaining to convince her that she stole the computer. I made her return the computer to the lab that night. She left it at the doorstep. I once dated a girl who legitimately thought we lived inside the Earth. We were talking about SpaceX back when they were just starting to get more public attention. I mentioned something about how it was cool we'll be alive, to potentially see humanity reach for the stars. Her response was something along the lines of, "Yeah, but how do they get to space?" Confused, I said. "With the rockets, like in the video." She replied with something like, "Yeah, but don't we have to get outside of the Earth first?" Dumbfounded, I asked for further clarification. She goes on to say, in a tone that suggests I am the idiot here, "We live inside the Earth, so how the hell do we get out so we can reach space?" I then inform her, "We live on the outside of the Earth, that's why you see open sky and stars, and the sun, and not more Earth above you." She then laughs and states, "If we lived on the outside of the Earth, wouldn't we just fall off?" Still, as if I'm the idiot. My jaw dropped. I responded with a simple, "Gravity? The atmosphere?" To which she says, "Oh yeah, that, whatever, how was I supposed to know?" I asked if this was a joke. It wasn't a joke. She thought we lived in the Earth up until that moment. Where exactly in the Earth? I don't know. I'm afraid to know. I was speechless. She told me to never tell anyone. But we broke up years ago. I think it was for the best. Asked your partners whether they think we live on the inside or outside of the Earth and replied to this to let me know. I'm curious. I've been bearing this weight alone for close to 10 years. I'd love to know if there are other inner Earth dwellers unknowingly roaming the surface. After her third business opportunity turned out to be another pyramid scheme. We didn't date long but knew each other for a while before that. I liked her for her work hard, get paid attitude. Turns out the hard work she was doing was costing her way more than she made, and didn't realize it. One night he turned to me and said, "You're a bit of a scientist. Can you explain how I can take frozen yogurt from the freezer, put it in the fridge, and it melts?" And I, already concerned, replied, "Well, the fridge is warmer, it's not cold enough to keep it frozen." And he then asked, "But it's still cold?" And I had to explain that there are different levels of cold. Somewhere along the way I said, "Cold is the absence of heat like darkness is the absence of light." And he was so mind-blown by that. When I asked her to hand me a kitchen knife and she threw it at me, and that's not even the stupidest part. When I tried to explain the basics of handing someone a knife, or a pair of scissors, she refused to accept that what she did was wrong or unsafe. It was suddenly apparent that she couldn't possibly ever admit to being wrong. She worked for a specialty decorated cookie shop at the mall, like where you get those dinner plate-sized cookies, with "Get Well Soon" or whatever written in frosting. She texted me a picture from work, proudly showing me a cookie she had decorated for a customer. She was legitimately excited to show me her creation. I had not previously seen any of her masterpieces prior to this. Not only did the artwork look like a 3-year-old's finger painting, but it said "Congratulations," which aside from the obviously bad spelling, she had clearly not even planned out the spacing in her head first, so it said "Conradu" across the whole cookie, and then, in tiny letters up the side, Latins. She thought it came out pretty well. She was about 30 at the time. I'll be honest, I broke things off shortly afterwards because of that cookie. She was struggling with money and being able to save. I came home one day, and she had a new $40,000 car in the driveway. She purchased it without even discussing it with me. She essentially sentenced herself to having no savings for the next 5 years when we were trying to save to buy a house together. She refused to pay taxes, have a bank account, or pay for public transit. She told me, "I change my name every few years so they can't find me." Like she'd go to the government and change her name legally, so the government couldn't find her. We broke up for other reasons, but this was the first red flag. She kept stating the big revelation of her story with "Lord and behold," instead of "Lo and behold." I told her she was using the wrong word, but I was the idiot because you behold the Lord. Anyways, Lord and behold, she slept with 5 other dudes, so we're on a more than temporary break. My ex wanted to start a business making supplies for baby showers. Her business plan was to sell everything below cost to increase sales. After I had explained numerous times that you cannot profit from a business that will inevitably lose money, Her reply was that I was the idiot, because if she sold them cheap, it would drum up more business and she would sell more that way. He's a Catholic, and me too, so I asked him where he thought heaven was. He said there was the sky, then heaven, and then space. I asked him if NASA went through heaven on their way to space, and he said, probably. He also thought that if you were pregnant, that you still had to use contraception, or you could get pregnant again, and again, and again. For example, you fall pregnant in February, and then again in March, and again in May, and you just deliver them 9 months from conception. He's an attorney with a 3.6 GPA law degree, and master's in law, is French, and bilingual, practicing law in Ireland. Somewhat academically smart, but otherwise questionable. I asked him to feed my fish once. He put the food on top of the lid of the tank and couldn't figure out why they couldn't access it. Briefly dated a stupidly beautiful Thai guy. Very chill, loving, sincere Buddhist. It's been years and I'm not super clear on what he meant, but he was going on saying something about generating good karma by doing good deeds. That's cool, I approve. Then he tells me he's gone to the Asian market and bought a cooler full of live fish and released them into a large local lake here in North Carolina, species of non-native fish and frogs, potentially carrying pathogens. I actually cried out when he told me. He was baffled that I should be upset, and basically said that I was unkind and didn't know what I was talking about, that fish are fish, and it was a good thing. He said he's done it several times before. I tried to explain about invasive species, bacteria, viruses, and food chains, but he never could grasp it. I still wonder if he introduced something terrible. He was stupidly beautiful and stupidly stupid. I once asked my ex to start boiling the potatoes for dinner about 20 minutes before I got home so that they would be close to ready for me to mash up as the side for dinner. I got home right as he put them in the water. He had to call his dad to ask how to boil potatoes. He also, a month later, argued with my dad on the best way to replace a '98 Honda Civic alternator. My dad was a master certified Honda technician in the early 2000s, specializing in cars and minivans. My dad very much knew what he was talking about. No longer dating, but after homecoming in high school, we went for pizza. She wanted to try a vegetarian diet, and as we were selecting toppings, she looked at me. Is there meat in mushrooms? I half smiled thinking it was a joke. She just looked back expecting the answer. I gave her an old phone of mine. Then I went with her to the mall to have it set up on a new contract. Smartphones and data plans were relatively new at the time. I took her home, explained and showed how to make sure she was on the house Wi-Fi whenever at home to not use up her data plan. Explained the difference between the two. She kept calling it Wi-Fi. Every damn time I corrected her, she kept doing it. She couldn't figure out the difference still. She racked up a phone bill of almost $3,000. We unfortunately broke up before I got to see how that played out for her. I came home from work, walked through the front door, and said, "God damn it, how many damn times have I told you not to dry clothes on the damn heater?" She told me I was being a drama queen, so I brought her attention to the fire in the middle of the living room. If she turned her head 45 degrees to the right, she would have seen it, but she was too into the TV. She worked in a lawyer's office and didn't know what legal and illegal meant. She wondered how cows didn't fall in the river when drinking. One time she called me in a panic thinking a helicopter was going to fly in her window. I was putting things in the fridge, grouping things like meats, drinks, yogurts so they are all together and not a random mess. She noticed how I did it, laughed at me and reorganized everything so there were a few items on the top shelf against the walls, more items in the middle shelf against the walls and some on the bottom in the middle. When I asked why, she told me it's so the light can hit all the items, because that's what makes it cold. When I showed her the switch the door hits when it's closed, and the light went out, she looked at me like a dog being shown a card trick. He'd asked me to sign a prenuptial contract which I agreed to even though I thought it was silly since he didn't have any assets to protect, and neither did I really. But if anyone did have assets it was me because I at least have some royalties and an inheritance, whereas he had nothing. Moreover, in our state, premarital assets are off the table anyways in a divorce, and the courts will fight you to do 50-50 splits to save them time and hassle. Nonetheless, if it was going to make him happy, I agreed. 2 days before our civil ceremony he announced that he had the paperwork finally. I'd totally forgotten and was very interested in seeing what he'd had drawn up. What he handed me, though, was not a prenuptial contract. It was a piece of printer paper with some chicken scratch in pencil that was a literal list of chores and demands. I can't remember all of them, but I do remember a few. Must wake up before 9:30 a.m. every day including Sundays. Must cook at least 5 delicious home-cooked meals a week. He relentlessly insulted my cooking and put delicious in all caps. Must clean under the sofa 1 time a week. It really went on like this. I read it and literally laughed out loud. You can't be serious. Where is the real prenuptial contract? Then he got angry and insisted it was the prenuptial, and I'm like, a prenuptial agreement is a legal document. This is just a list of chores and demands. This is not a prenuptial. At which point he became enraged and demanded I sign it right now. I tried to explain to him it didn't matter if I signed it or wiped my ass with it, it wasn't a prenuptial. He threatened to call off the wedding, and frankly, I should have let him because after 5 years of hell we are divorced in the nastiest of ways. What really killed me about the prenuptial thing was I had always known he was a bastard, that I felt I could live with. But I really didn't realize he was truly dumb as hell until that moment. In that moment I realized, he thought he wanted a prenuptial because he didn't even know what it was. But he thought he did, so he didn't even bother to look it up. He had over a year to look up what a prenuptial was, download a template, fill it out and have it notarized, but he didn't do that. He didn't do any research, or put any effort into it, because he just stupidly assumed he knew what it was. So, while I had thought it was funny for him to ask that of me, knowing a prenuptial agreement was superfluous, he really thought a prenuptial was a list of demands you get your wife to sign off on as a legally binding agreement to do chores. Like as if I didn't clean under the sofa he'd have grounds to divorce me or something. I mean, truly stupid, arrogant, ignorant, and just unbelievably dumb, and I married the idiot knowing all this.